Good morning and welcome to our geopolitical outlook for 2020. I can tell you that this entire year is one that I think all of us would sooner forget. It is, for many of us, almost cataclysmic in the entirety of the interactions that it changes and distorts, and it leaves you wondering in a sort of disembodied way, where do we go from here? And part of that feeling of tremendous alienation is brought about by what I call the pandemic of incompetence. It is fair to say that Boris Johnson and Donald Trump, as well as Mr. Bolsonaro in Brazil, have led the way in a populist manifestation of some of the most grotesque incompetence known to man for handling a public health emergency. We are suffering not only from the ill effects of COVID, but from the demonstrably ill effects of political systems that are no longer fit for purpose in respect to the political parties that have achieved power in recent years. Whether we ascribe that to the increasing polarization brought about by the internet and massive income inequality, or to Russian interference, what we're going to talk about today are really 5 key trends I see, the first one of which being this pandemic of incompetence, but also the new geopolitical forces at work that in many ways have turned international politics completely upside down as well. We are not only seeing this contest between China and the United States take shape as a very frigid Cold War with respect to all matters, perhaps excluding the trade truce, but we are seeing a tremendous diminution in the soft power of both the United States and China. And I think it's very important to stress both of these massive countries are suffering. It is not just the United States that looks every night on its TV to be falling apart in front of us with the cataclysm of the West Coast fires, the East Coast cities and Portland burning, and the insanity of a president who appears out of control. It's also the Chinese who are engaging in absolutely incredibly blatant attacks on their own soft power. The people of Taiwan have watched closely what happened in Hong Kong. We've all watched closely what's happened in Hong Kong. The people of Southeast Asia have watched what's happened in Hong Kong. They've also watched what's happening in the South China Sea. And we're in this situation where the quiet rise of China that we'd heard about for almost a generation has come to a thundering halt. And we now have a new and more assertive China. Now, whether that's come about because of the perceived decline in the growth of the Chinese economy, which this year will grow under 2%, or whether that's because of issues relating to the reassertion of Xi Jinping's domestic dominance, we can't speculate. But what we can say is both the United States and China have seen their soft power erode during this period of time. And at the same time, the diminution of democratic institutions in favor of authoritarianism has still continued. The Russian attack on American and European institutions that in some small way may have assisted Brexit and certainly assisted Trump's entry into the White House, has had a very profound effect. Whatever you want to say about the use by Russia of active measures, history will view their success over the last 4 or 5 years as truly a historic event and a demonstration of a new asymmetric use of their power. We also need to understand that Secretary of State Pompeo and President Trump's use of the Cold War analogy with a country that is holding literally trillions of dollars of American debt is quite risky on a macroeconomic sense. And we need to remember that in 2008, the Russians wanted to team up with China and sell off Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac securities. And it was only the more cautious Chinese that saved the American economy at that time. And I think for those of us engaged in the business world, we need to understand that the trade war is going to involve a significant decoupling of these two great economies. And it's going to involve setting up new supply chains, setting up new methods of doing business. The tech war alone looks like it's going to cost $3.5 trillion. And not only that, the American behavior in respect to Huawei and TikTok almost appears to be the United States adopting methods that we would normally have criticized the Chinese or the Russians for engaging in. The US is adopting very authoritarian, non-due process types of stands in respect to their economic relationships with China and to some extent with Russia. And this could cost us dearly. The other thing to be aware of is that both the US and China are not only aggressive towards each other, but they're aggressive towards their own allies and the other's allies. I think it should not be missed that rather than exercise soft power with both Canada and Australia, China has decided to aggressively take hostages with respect to the Canadians because they are holding the daughter of one of the key owners of Huawei. And they have taken equally aggressive steps with Western media and particularly with the Australians, who have demanded an intensive investigation on the spread of COVID-19. What we can talk about as well is the continuous American attacks on their own allies, the tariffs against Canada, the threats against Canada and Mexico, the horrific display of American pique with the reduction of troop strength in Germany, and the consistent attacks on our great allies, the South Koreans. One really does have to sit back and look in wonder at this transition from organized series of alliances that lasted for decades to the relative chaos and pandemonium that we see on the world stage today. The UK, of course, in terms of China, can't seem to make up its mind. The UK was one of the supporters of the Asian Infrastructure Development Bank. If you remember, David Cameron's Conservatives were all in with China. And now Boris Johnson's Conservatives are all in on banning Huawei and bringing 3 million folks from Hong Kong over in a manner that will do nothing but completely exacerbate tensions. We need to also understand that cyber war and sanctions, cyber war being deployed most effectively by Russia and to some extent China in perhaps the greatest run of cyber theft of technology that the world has ever seen, allowing China to produce military equipment at 10% the cost of the United States and then resell that stolen equipment to compete with American products. But the American counter to that, the proliferation by the United States of sanctions against everyone and their brother, and I'm not talking about the Magnitsky Act, which I fully understand and in many ways have fully supported. I'm talking about the mindless use of sanctions as a substitute for foreign policy. And we can see this, we saw this in the brutal war on the Iraqi people, with sanctions visited upon them. We see it today with sanctions with respect to Venezuela and a failed American policy there. We have seen it with respect to Iran and North Korea, where while the sanctions, many believe, have been successful at destroying these economies, they certainly have not helped bring about peace or necessarily brought about the betterment of American interests in these regions. The proliferation of sanctions and cyber attacks in many ways means that we are at war. And what's incredibly dangerous about this war is it can go from cold to hot very quickly without us fully understanding the impact of our actions. Americans have no idea of the power of their sanctions globally or of the impact that their foreign policy has had across the globe for decades. It is startling for me to say that the greatest contributor to the chaos we see in the world today has been not Russian expansionism or Chinese expansionism, but unquestionably the American penchant for regime change that goes on today unabated. When you look at hotspots around the world, Central America falling into complete failed state status, or Iran, the Americans overthrew the government of Mossadegh in 1954. The Americans overthrew the government of Arbenz in Guatemala. The Americans overthrew numerous attempts to overthrow governments in Turkey and Thailand and numerous other countries, almost too many to count. Recent books have come out about the terrible toll of almost 1 million that were killed in the American attempts to destabilize Sukarno decades ago. But we still live with the impacts of these regime changes. And we still live with the impacts of cyber war. We all know what happened to Estonia in 2007. We all know what happened with Stuxnet, which was released by the United States and Israel against Iran. We all know what happened in 2016 with respect to the United States and the Russian interference in the American election. Now, a true irony, it's more than an irony. It is almost shocking, given the chaos and corruption of the Trump administration, to admit that Donald Trump's intuitive grasp of power politics in the Middle East, and with respect to some extent with China, have proven corrupt. For all that the Democrats want to lecture about the Iran deal they did or the recognition of Cuba, it all pales compared to the deal recently conducted between the United States and, on one hand, the UAE, and the other hand, Israel. And now we have Bahrain possibly joining, in fact, definitely joining this troika. This is a massive accomplishment. And it is an accomplishment of Donald Trump and Jared Kushner. I find it difficult to even say the words. It is their accomplishment, but it also is, to some extent, a result of what I am calling pandemic politics, which is that the pandemic and the economic catastrophe with which we will find ourselves over the next few years is leading to new alliances, new relationships, and the triumph of pragmatism over ideology. We understand, the UAE understands from a position that's tremendous difficulty, as is Israel's, that they need new markets. They need to penetrate and develop new ties, which trump ideology, trump the Palestinians, and which have come about through the belief that obtaining new technologies, obtaining new tourist routes, obtaining exchange, exports, imports, and activity will now rule the day. And this is a situation and a moment where, interestingly enough, more and more attention will be paid to middle powers who are going to be making attempts to trade and develop in the pockets of power that the United States has left behind. Who are these middle powers? Turkey is one. Iran is another. Brazil, once it gets itself back on its feet, is another. Japan, under its new leader, may be another. And we can't write off the United States either, because they have the ability to come back in incredible ways. I remember the Carter administration. I'm admitting my age here. And during Jimmy Carter's administration, many of us thought the best days of the United States were behind us. Europe was taking over. The United States had stagflation, and we had put the interests of ideology above everything else, and our economy was going to hell. And of course, the US came back to have this massive streak in the 90s where it became the unassailable global superpower. So out of all this chaos, I'm not writing off the United States, nor for that matter am I writing off China. But what I am saying is that we are in a world where the level of risk we are seeing is beyond anything we've seen in the past. At any moment, the relationship between China and India could turn into a hot war. At any moment, there could be a collision between the United States and China in the South China Sea. At any moment, and specifically before the election in November, the United States may engage in hostile activity in any number of countries where Donald Trump may decide in a wag the dog-like way that he must engage in some activity of a military nature to unite the country behind his leadership, particularly as his numbers continue to be of doubt in Florida and other parts of the Hispanic voting states. It is this unique rise in political and economic risk that is central to the activities of high net worth individuals and their family offices to take into account with respect to investors, investments, and the increasing growth that I speak about every year of the criminal powers of the state that are used against economic competitors. We see this more and more in country after country where you would least suspect it. We've been involved in trying to assist people from Algeria to Yemen in respect to the problems that are brought about by shocking levels of political uncertainty and change that has come with, even in authoritarian states like Belarus, where you see massive overnight changes. Russia is moving into Africa in a major way, which very few in the West understand. So the end result of all of this change, the end result of the pandemic of incompetence that we suffer from, is that there has never been a better time to, number one, hedge our bets from an economic standpoint. Number two, understand that in so many ways we can provide asymmetric returns in respect to those of us who want to engage themselves in political activity or political organization rather than simply staying quiet and on the margins of key issues that can affect their livelihoods. This is a moment where everyone needs to be counted. It is a moment in time where those with the guts to jump in, a la Russia in the 90s, if you will, could stand to make significant profits and engage in significantly important social and political activities and get results that you could have never gotten before the chaos that we are presently living in. So I wish you all well. I'm sorry I'm not there to take questions or to see you, but I hope next year we will meet again in London, if not Jerusalem, to chat and discuss world events. Thank you for allowing me to take your time.